Since she was young, she dreamed of a stable and peaceful life. Her biggest desire was always to create a close-knit family, where her children would have everything she didn't have growing up. The modest house she lived in, though simple, was filled with love and hope. For her, happiness was in the small things, seeing her children grow up healthy and providing moments of joy and peace within their home. All she wanted was for her kids to live surrounded by security and affection. As time went on, these dreams guided all of her choices. Her husband had a steady job, and even without luxuries, the life they built together seemed to fulfill her desires. Each smile from the kids confirmed that she was on the right path. But behind this perfect image, she always had a feeling that something was coming, as if fate was holding back a twist. However, at that moment, everything seemed to be just where it should be, and she was focused on keeping that balance for as long as possible. Deep down, the mother knew that life was full of ups and downs, but she preferred not to dwell on it. Her role was to care for her children and ensure they had a solid foundation for the future. She dedicated herself wholeheartedly, and her own dreams, which were once big, were now put on the back burner. Still, she never imagined that soon she would have to give up everything, including the small comforts she had gained, to protect those she loved. But destiny was about to test her strength. Time passed, and as happens with all dreams, reality began to set in. Bills started piling up, and her husband's job was no longer enough to maintain the stability she cherished so much. Without hesitation, she made the decision to look for a job. It wasn't something she had expected to do, but her children's well-being came before anything else. The peaceful days at home were replaced by a routine of work, sacrifices, and sleepless nights, as she tried to juggle all of her responsibilities. Gradually, she realized that her own dreams were drifting further and further away. The little things she wanted to do for herself, like study or learn something new, were left behind. Everything revolved around her children, what they would eat, how she would pay for school, and how she would secure a better future for them. Her life became a series of tough decisions, where personal sacrifice was the only option. She didn't complain, but sometimes she felt the weight of being alone in this journey, while her husband, distant, seemed unaware of the seriousness of their situation. Despite everything, there was an invisible force that kept her going. Each time she looked at her children's faces, she found the courage to carry on. Even though exhaustion overwhelmed her body, the love she felt for them pushed her forward. The hardship seemed endless, but the mother stayed strong. She knew this was only the beginning of a long battle, and although her own ambitions had been set aside, her determination to ensure her children never went without was unwavering. Over time, the financial difficulties worsened. Her salary, combined with her husband's, barely covered the family's basic needs. The bills seemed to grow every month, and financial worries became constant. There were days when she wondered how she would put food on the table, but despite the uncertainties, she always found a way to ensure her children's well-being. The sacrifices became heavier, and the comfort that once existed in her life was replaced by an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. The difficulties weren't just financial. The burden of work, both inside and outside the home, started to take its toll. The mother began working 2 jobs, leaving early and coming back late, with almost no time for herself. Restful nights became rare, and she barely had time to enjoy moments with her kids, leaving her with a feeling of guilt. Still, she kept her head held high, knowing that every effort was necessary to keep the family united and protected. It felt like she was in a constant race against time, trying to do everything at once. No matter how much the physical and emotional strain increased, she knew that giving up was not an option. With each passing day, she learned to deal with the daily challenges, always looking for new ways to save money and take care of her children. Even with the external pressures, the mother remained strong, determined to keep going, facing whatever was necessary. The children, though aware of their mother's efforts, didn't yet understand the full depth of her sacrifices. To her, the most important thing was that they were safe and had everything they needed, even if it cost her everything. The separation began to take shape when the arguments between Sarah and John became more frequent. The two barely had time for each other, and the household and financial responsibilities increasingly fell on Sarah. John, in turn, sank deeper into alcohol, unable to handle the pressures of family life. He didn't know how to manage money and, despite having a stable job, spent more than he earned, leaving Sarah to cover the bills and take care of the children and all the other household responsibilities. As time went on, the fights became unbearable. The stress of being the only source of stability in the family started to deeply affect Sarah. While John distanced himself, turning to alcohol, she found herself more and more overwhelmed, trying to keep everything running for the sake of the children. The love that had once united the couple seemed to have faded, replaced by resentment and pain. Attempts to resolve the problems always ended in even more bitter arguments, until finally, the decision was made: separation was inevitable. The divorce left deep scars on Sarah. Now, in addition to handling all the responsibilities of being a mother and provider, she had to face the pain of a failed marriage. When John left, he didn't just leave the family behind, he also left a pile of debts and problems for Sarah to deal with alone. She knew that from that moment on, she would be solely responsible for guiding her children through the storm. The separation, though painful, opened her eyes to the reality that she needed to be strong, no matter what challenges life threw at her. When John walked out the door for the last time, Sarah felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. It wasn't just the loss of a husband, it was the loss of the future she had so desperately tried to maintain. The memories of the happy early years now seemed distant, almost unreal. But though her heart was heavy, the silence inside the house wouldn't allow her to succumb to despair. There was a family depending on her, and even though she was grieving, she knew she had to keep it all together. The days following the separation were a test of endurance. For the first time in years, Sarah had to manage daily demands without any emotional or financial support from John. He had completely withdrawn, leaving her with the debts, the kids, and a heart full of scars. Each night was a battle against exhaustion, but Sarah wouldn't allow herself to falter. She closed her eyes, remembered her children sleeping in the room next door, and found strength she didn't know she had to carry on. The grief was real, but her responsibility was even greater. The pain of losing her husband didn't go away, but the urgency of daily life forced her to focus on the present. The grief was always there, like a shadow, but Sarah discovered that the love for her children was a flame that kept her from falling apart. She knew that moving forward wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. So, little by little, she started to build a new life, one where the past, though painful, would no longer define who she was. She began finding small victories that reminded her that, despite everything, there was a path forward. As time passed, Sarah began to realize that, in addition to fighting to keep her family afloat, she also had to deal with the silent judgment of those around her. Living as a single mother, with an absent ex-husband, brought disapproving looks and subtle comments. At social gatherings, she felt the unspoken questions, the assumptions that she had failed to keep her family together. The same neighbors who once greeted her with smiles now watched her from a distance, as if she were a tragic figure. This social isolation didn't visibly shake her, but inside, Sarah felt the weight of each silent criticism. Old friends drifted away, some not knowing what to say, others judging her choices. She wouldn't allow herself to react to the gossip and opinions, but in moments of loneliness, those words echoed in her mind. The pressure of being a perfect mother in a world that always demanded more made her question whether she was doing enough. Yet, no matter how heavy the judgment felt, Sarah knew that, in the end, her choices were for the good of her children. With each veiled criticism, Sarah grew even stronger. She knew that the world didn't understand her daily struggles and that many would never comprehend the sacrifices she made. But her focus was clear, ensuring her children had a decent life, no matter what others thought. She chose not to let social isolation define her. Instead, she used that solitude as fuel to keep moving forward, reminding herself that the true judgment would come from her children, and they were the ones she couldn't let down. As the emotional and physical toll grew heavier by the day, Sarah's body began showing signs of exhaustion. The sleepless nights, the relentless work, and the constant stress started to manifest in her health. She felt constant pain in her back and shoulders, and fatigue became a daily companion. Yet, no matter how much her body cried out for rest, she refused to stop. The need to keep going and continue taking care of her children outweighed any physical pain she felt. On top of the health issues, there was the constant presence of John, the ex-husband, who occasionally showed up to see the kids. Always with empty promises, he'd say he was going to change, that this time would be different, but Sarah knew it was always temporary. He would show up smelling of alcohol, with no money and no real ability to offer any kind of support. His visits were a constant reminder of the weight she carried alone, while John remained lost in his world, unable to take responsibility. Even with all these adversities, Sarah wouldn't let her own limitations stop her from taking care of the children. Pain and exhaustion became daily companions, but the love she had for her children pushed her to continue. Every time John left the house after another broken promise, Sarah knew that it was up to her alone to secure the family's future. No matter how much her body suffered, she refused to give up. To her, quitting was never an option. Despite the hardships and the heavy burden she bore, Sarah found strength in the small moments of victory that came her way each day. One of the kids brought home a high grade from school, and the joy in their eyes made all of Sarah's exhaustion disappear for a moment. These little achievements, like seeing her kids progress in school or landing a new job, filled her with hope. They were reminders that, despite everything, her efforts were not in vain. Sarah saw in each of her children's victories a confirmation that, somehow, everything would turn out fine in the end. These small victories were the fuel Sarah needed to keep going. Even though the burden was heavy, she knew she was making a difference in her children's lives. Sometimes, she'd manage to pay a bill before it was due, or she'd buy something extra at the grocery store, things that seemed simple, but for Sarah, they represented great triumphs. Each accomplishment was a light in the darkness that seemed to surround her, and she clung to those moments with all her strength. Over time, these victories began to have a bigger impact than Sarah could have imagined. The children noticed how hard she was fighting for them, and it inspired them to work even harder, not only in school but in all areas of their lives. Sarah began to feel that her sacrifice was taking root and that, despite the difficulties, she was building a solid future for them. The small victories were like seeds that, little by little, started to bloom, giving her the strength she needed to face the challenges ahead. In time, Sarah realized that the hardships she was enduring were teaching her children something valuable. She never shielded them from reality, but she also never let them lose hope. In the midst of the daily struggles, Sarah taught them lessons about resilience, honesty, and hard work. Whenever an obstacle arose, she showed them the importance of facing challenges with courage and determination. Even when exhausted, she made sure to talk to her children, explaining that difficulties could be overcome with effort and unity. These conversations, often during dinner or before bed, weren't planned but were deeply sincere. Sarah knew that her children were absorbing everything they saw and heard, so she made it a point to be an example for them. What she wanted most was for them to grow up capable of facing the world with integrity and strength. Instead of hiding the difficulties, she turned the tough situations into learning opportunities, showing that despite everything, they could still achieve their dreams. And so, Sarah's life lessons began to visibly shape her children. They learned to appreciate what they had, even if it was little, and to recognize the importance of effort. When one of them faced a problem, like a challenge at school, Sarah encouraged them not to give up, reminding them that great victories were achieved with patience and hard work. By teaching her children to face life with courage, Sarah felt she was preparing them for a future where, no matter the circumstances, they would know how to pick themselves up after a fall. When everything seemed to be in an endless cycle of struggle and sacrifice, a new opportunity arose, changing the course of Sarah's life and her family's. After years of battling through temporary jobs, Sarah received an offer for a stable position, with better conditions and a salary that would finally provide more financial security. It was an opportunity that came at the moment she least expected, but when she needed it most. The joy mixed with relief was almost indescribable. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt that the future could be different. With the new job, Sarah gained more control over the family's finances. The bills were no longer an overwhelming concern, and she was able to start saving for emergencies, something that had seemed impossible before. Small improvements in their daily lives began to show. The children noticed there was more food at home, their clothes were newer, and though Sarah was still tired, she seemed lighter. This new phase brought a renewed sense of hope, something Sarah hadn't felt in a long time. This new opportunity also meant that Sarah could spend more time with her children, something that had been sacrificed over the years due to her multiple jobs. This extra time allowed her to strengthen the bond with them, being more present in their daily lives. The difficulties didn't disappear, but with this change, Sarah felt she was in a stronger position to face whatever came next. The road was still long, but for the first time, she saw the possibility of a more stable and prosperous future for them all. With the new job and financial stability, Sarah began to view the criticism and judgments differently. Now, those who had once looked down on her for being a single mother tried to justify her life change as luck or something she had only achieved with outside help. The judgments came from all sides, but Sarah was used to it by now. What she didn't expect was the sudden approach of John, her ex-husband, who, noticing her new phase, started visiting more frequently and suggesting a reconciliation. John, visibly regretful, said he wanted to come back home and be a family again. He used Sarah's new situation as an argument, claiming she had overcome the hardships and that now, with more stability, they could start over. He talked about reconnecting with the children, who had become more distant from him, and tried to convince them that things would be different this time. But Sarah knew that time and broken promises couldn't be erased so easily. The love she once felt for him had been eroded by the hurts, and she wondered if this was just another one of John's empty attempts. Even with the sweet words and promises of change, Sarah remained firm. She knew that the stability she had fought so hard to achieve couldn't be put at risk. The children, who also felt torn, began to notice the manipulation behind their father's intentions. As much as John tried to re-enter their lives, Sarah knew her focus had to stay on her children and on continuing to build a solid future for them. The trust that once existed couldn't be regained with words, and the judgments of those around her wouldn't stop her from moving forward. Despite John's attempts and the ongoing criticisms from others, Sarah never lost sight of what mattered most: her children. They were the reason she fought every day, the motivation behind every sacrifice she made. It didn't matter what others thought, nor the empty promises from John. The love Sarah had for her children was unconditional and unshakable. Even in the most difficult moments, when exhaustion seemed unbearable, she always found strength by thinking of them. Her children began to notice more and more how much their mother was dedicated to them. As they grew, their understanding of everything Sarah had done for them deepened. They recognized that despite the challenges, she had never stopped fighting for a better future. The bond between Sarah and her children grew stronger over time, and they became more grateful for every effort she had made, understanding that her love was the true foundation of their lives. Sarah never sought recognition, but gradually, that recognition came. This love, which was the fuel for her persistence, was also what kept her resilient in the face of John's attempts to win them back. He wanted to return home, but Sarah knew that the real support her children needed didn't come from an absent and unstable figure, but from a present and hardworking mother. Sarah remained focused on her goal: to provide them with a stable, secure life filled with love. And every day, she saw that love reflected in her children's eyes and actions, confirming that everything she had done was worth it. As time passed, something unexpected began to happen. John, recognizing the impact his choices had had on his life and that of his family, decided to seek help. He turned to a support house to treat his alcohol addiction and started attending regular sessions with psychologists. For the first time in years, John showed real signs that he wanted to change, not just for himself, but to regain the trust of his children and Sarah. His decision to seek help surprised everyone, but he was determined to walk a new path. The children, initially skeptical, began to notice small changes in his behavior. John, who used to show up smelling of alcohol and with no money, now appeared calmer, more aware of his words and actions. He didn't ask for forgiveness out loud, but his efforts to reconnect with the kids spoke for themselves. Gradually, they began to make room in their hearts for their father. Although the pain was still there, they also recognized that he was trying. The visits, once tense, started to become lighter and filled with hope. While John worked on his recovery, Sarah watched everything from a distance, keeping her focus on the family's stability. But she couldn't ignore the changes she saw. The children, who had always been the center of her life, were now recognizing not only her sacrifice but also their father's effort. John's transformation brought a new dynamic to the family, and slowly, Sarah realized that maybe there was a chance for rebuilding, not a romantic reconciliation, but a family reconnection. She knew the road would still be long, but the change was evident. As the years went by, Sarah and John's children began to find their own paths. Each, in their own way, achieved success, whether in school, work, or personal relationships. Sarah's sacrifice, which often went unnoticed during the tough times, was now recognized and celebrated by them. They understood that if they had reached where they were, it was because of their mother's strength and tireless dedication. Each of their small successes was a direct reflection of everything Sarah had done to ensure they had a better life. The children's success brought a new phase of gratitude to the family. They not only acknowledged Sarah's sacrifices but also felt deeply grateful for all that she had endured to keep them together. Sarah, who never sought recognition or praise, was moved to see the fruits of all her efforts. Seeing her children independent and happy brought a sense of accomplishment that surpassed any challenge she had faced over the years. Now, she could finally breathe a little easier, knowing she had fulfilled her role as a mother with excellence. John, meanwhile, continued on his path of recovery, and over time, also regained the respect and love of his children. He knew he could never erase the mistakes of the past, but just being present, trying to be a better father, was already a huge step. Together, they all created an environment of harmony and respect, where old wounds began to heal. It was as if, after so many battles, peace had finally arrived. And at the center of that peace was Sarah, who had always been the pillar that held the family together. As time passed, the family, once fragmented and scarred by hurt, found a path to reconciliation and harmony. Sarah, now able to rest from her long journey of sacrifice, watched with satisfaction as the unity between her children and John grew. John's transformation was one of the biggest twists the family had ever experienced. He, once lost in his own mistakes, had managed to redeem himself in the eyes of his children and Sarah, showing that forgiveness and reconciliation, though difficult, were possible. His journey toward emotional healing was slow but steady, and the result was a family more united than ever. Time, which once seemed cruel, was now bringing healing. The children, seeing their father's genuine effort to change, welcomed him back into their lives. Sarah's presence, always so firm and determined, had been the foundation that made this turnaround possible. Now, they spent more time together, creating new memories and leaving behind the scars of the past. Sarah, who had always dreamed of a united family, was finally able to experience this peace. Forgiveness didn't come instantly, but through a process of mutual understanding and unconditional love. In the end, John, now elderly and in fragile health, was able to pass away in peace. He left knowing he had been forgiven for his mistakes and that the family he had once nearly destroyed was now stronger than ever. Sarah, despite everything she had been through, felt that her mission as a mother had been fulfilled. She saw in her children not only the reflection of her sacrifice but also proof that, in the end, love and dedication overcome any adversity. The family, which had once faced so many storms, now lived in peace, united by gratitude and love. So, did you enjoy this moving story of perseverance and forgiveness? This dedicated mother's journey shows us the power of love and resilience, even in the toughest times. We want to know your thoughts. Comment below about what moved you the most in this story and if you've ever experienced or know someone who has been through something similar. Don't forget to leave your like. It helps us a lot in continuing to bring more stories like this. And if you have an incredible story of perseverance or know someone who does, share it with us. Who knows, the next story on the channel could be yours. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Keep following us and be inspired by more touching stories that will warm your heart. See you in the next video.